The New York Central Railroad, NYC, called the 482 type of steam locomotive the Mohawk type. It was known as the mountain type on other roads, but the mighty New York Central didn't see the name to be fitting on its famous water-level route, so it instead picked the name of one of those rivers its rails followed, the Mohawk River, to name its newest type of locomotive. Despite the more common name, the 482 was actually suited in many ways more to flatland running than slow mountain slogging, with its four-wheel leading truck for stability at speed. Indeed, the New York Central became the largest user of this wheel arrangement in North America, with 600 locomotives of this type built for its service. Only the Pennsylvania Railroad came anywhere close, with 301 of the type. The Mohawk type was the preeminent freight power of the system, displacing the Mikado 282 type from first-line service, while other roads obtained much more massive freight power. Decapods 210 OS, Texas 2104 types and a multitude of articulated designs. The New York Central, with its practically gradeless high-speed raceways along the rivers, needed speed, not lugging ability. The 600 Mohawks delivered were divided into four main classes, plus a few experimental and prototypes. L1. The first Mohawks delivered for the NYC were delivered by Alco in 1916. These were purely freighters, with 69-inch drivers and small tenders. Further orders of L1 subclasses followed in subsequent years, including some from the Lima Locomotive Works. All these locomotives had uncluttered lines as built, mostly thanks to the lack of such modern appliances as feedwater heaters, booster engines and the like. Many had feedwater heaters and other appliances added later. However, 185 L1 locomotives were produced. Experimental three-cylindered. The New York Central had two L1 locomotives rebuilt by Alco in 1922 with three cylinders to help determine if three-cylinder drive was worthwhile. They were substantially more powerful than the two-cylinder locomotives, but it was debatable if the additional maintenance headaches of that third, hard-to-reach central cylinder, valve gear, main rod and crank axle were worthwhile. The NYC must have come down on the negative side of that question, for no more were built. L2. The next development of the Mohawk type for the New York Central was the L2. 300 of its various subclasses being built between 1925 to 1930. These were rather more modern locomotives than the L1 class. Flat-boiled, long-tended, fitted with feedwater heaters, mostly of the Elisco type and generally mounted in front of the smoke box at the top, giving an aggressive, beetle-browed look. Later L2 subclasses, the L2B and L2C, had somewhat smoother lines with recessed feedwater heaters and cleaned-up lines. The later L2 locomotives, in fact, looked very close in styling to the Central's fleet of Hudson passenger locomotives. L3. The next development of the Mohawk type was that of the dual-service locomotive, capable of working passenger as well as freight trains. Passenger service required the ability to work at 80 miles per hour, as opposed to the 60 miles per hour required of freight. The NYC's fleet of Hudsons, 275 strong though it was proving inadequate to handle peak traffic demands, and some dual-purpose power would fix the problem nicely, as well as giving the ability to handle express freight and mail services. Two L2 locomotives were given modifications for dual service work: higher boiler pressure, smaller cylinders, lightweight reciprocating parts, dynamic counterbalancing of the drivers, roller bearings on all axles, etc. The success of these modifications prompted the construction of the L3 class in 1940. 25 of which were built for dual service and the remaining 40 for freight only. All L3 locomotives were given axle spacing that could accommodate 72 inches drivers, but only one was ever fitted with such. This locomotive, number 3000, paved the way for the final class of Mohawks on the Central. The L4, L4, 50 L4 locomotives were produced by the Lima Locomotive Works in 1943. None of them had booster engines, although they were built to take them should they be ever needed in a dash. But they were not. The L4s were truly dual-purpose locomotives, and worked the heaviest freight and passenger trains during the war. The L3 and L4 classes had huge tenders riding on two six-wheeled trucks that were almost as long as the locomotives hauling them, and were mostly coal space, a capacity for 43 tons of coal. Water was taken en route using the tender scoop from track pans, and thus the locomotives did not need to have that great an onboard water capacity. Some L4s had scullion drivers. Many L4 locomotives were fitted with smoke deflectors later on. Survivors. 2 Mohawks survive, making them the most numerous examples of New York Central steam power remaining after all NYC's, Hudson's and Niagaras were scrapped. The first, number 2933, is a 1929 Alco-built L2D and resides at the Museum of Transportation, St. Louis, Missouri, while the second, number 3001, is a 1940 Alco-built L3A at the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana. The tenders for 2 other Mohawks still exist as well. The tender from 2662, a Class L1D, is currently in use behind Lake Superior and Ishpeming 28034 at the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad. The tender for L3B 3042 was converted into a water tender and used with Reading T1484-2101 during its tour with the American Freedom Train, as well as with the Chessie System Special. It was later damaged in a roundhouse fire. This water tender is now at the National New York Central Railroad Museum in Elkhart, Indiana. See also PRM1 of the Pennsylvania Railroad's version of the Mohawks. Also a dual-mode 482 mountain-type steam locomotive. Stauffer, Alvin F. 1961. Steam Power of the New York Central System Volume 1 Modern Power 1915–1955. Medina, O. Stauffer. Westcott, L. ed. 1960. Model Railroad Encyclopedia Volume 1. Steam Locomotives. Waukesha, Y. Kalmbach. ISBN 0-89024-001-9. Barris, W. New York Central Mohawks. Steam Locomotive. Com. Retrieved January 7, 2003. Morgan, David P. The Mohawk That Refused to Abdicate.